Hey there, and welcome to the Dynamics Hot Dish Podcast, serving up stories and knowledge on Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. This is What's Hot in Dynamics. You're now joining Merlin Schweiger, Liz McGlennon, and Ashley Steiner.
We could chit chat about how there's themes in the Maker portal, but they're not. They're stupid. I got really excited and then I was like, oh, it doesn't change when you change the environment? Like it just stays on the previous one? Like how dumb is that?
Seems less useful.
Yeah, because the whole point is like visually seeing what in like sandbox, prod, whatever.
Right. So you're not developing in the wrong spot on
Right.
accident.
I do all the time. Well, because like I'm like, oh, that's the one I was in last. So it's just gonna, of course it'll pop it up. Nope, does not.
No.
Because I've like done unmanaged stuff in our production and had to like rip it out. It's awful.
Yeah. So it's good they're taking a step in that direction. It's kind of weird that it doesn't update itself, but
It's interesting to see that progression though, right? Because like you can see where they're going, like they're laying little like stones for like where they're gonna go.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll get there. It's just the first step.
it's true. I did also though notice it looks like when they pushed the update that added the theme, they also pushed an update that changes when you're entering a choice. Like literally a week ago when I was creating a new choice, I could just hit enter and it would give me a new row and I type more and hit enter and I could type more. Well, today I hit enter and it gave me a new row, but then it left the cursor at the end of the previous row. So I had to hit tab twice to get to the new row I just created. I don't know. Very
It's
bizarre.
weird. Yeah. So weird things like that happen like when they're doing development, right? Because like it's just somebody like did something over here that impacted that and they just haven't caught up to fix it yet. That you'll find, Merlin, that those things will happen. Like there was a long time where the back button would just disappear when you were editing a form. And it happened every time. So you'd like open the form and then you'd have to like restart everything and be like, oh, I hope my changes like save. So it's just real finicky. And but yeah, I'm not surprised at all by that comment because little things will pop up every now and then.
Yeah, fair enough. It's a change valley.
Yes, it is. Okay, so should we talk about our topic for today?
I suppose.
Which is, how do you know when you're ready for a CRM admin? Or I should say a D365 / Power Platform admin.
You should say that. That was one of my points was I think that they should be the same person.
Yeah.
I actually had that in my notes too, Merlin, because you've always said that, I mean, you can't just be over CRM. It's such a bubble. You have to look at the whole picture of Dynamics and the Power Platform. So if you don't have that full concept, you can't really be an effective admin.
Yep, I would agree. Especially because there are so many other aspects in the platform now that you really need to build effective solutions for like a CRM use case.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever see that role incorporate like other Office apps? Like I've always wondered about that. Like they're so like closely knit now, like from a productivity perspective. Like what are your thoughts on that? Like do you include Teams or any of the other productivity apps with that role?
I was at like, I'm an admin, so this is like really like near and dear to my heart. Like just kind of what they do. I see like everyone comes, I don't want to say everyone, but like I am seen as like the Microsoft person just in general. Like people have questions on Teams. I do Teams training. I'm trying to get OneNote rolled out, so and I think it's just by the happenstance that like I tend to go to a lot of Microsoft things where they talk more than just Dynamics in the Power Platform. And I don't mind it either because those all integrate into the Dynamics world. So it makes sense.
Right. You've got some natural overlap there.
Mm-hmm. Now it's all like that front end user base though. Like there's no way I could be like doing SQL stuff or
you're not like
Azure database.
Yeah, you're not like the technical IT. Are you even responsible for like making sure like Teams is deployed and like the settings and all that, or are you supporting it from more of like an end user perspective?
Yeah, and so I would say doing training. So like exposing the company. I mean, now that we're all remote in like this COVID type world, we didn't have Teams rolled out until then. That was when we rolled it out, and everyone just kind of adopted it naturally. So now we're like well, this can actually do more than just call somebody. So I'm, and I've been using Teams for like 3 years. We were one of the early adopters back then. So maybe it was 4 years. Anyways, so just, so it's really nice to be able to like take that on. But I don't mind, but I like training people and getting people to believe in the tools that we have. May as well use everything to the full extent.
Yeah.
It's true. That actually makes you sound less like a CRM admin and more like I don't know, like a user evangelist or something. Like I'm trying to think of like what
Business
that
applications.
actually, yeah, like how do I do my job in the technology that we have kind of person.
Yeah, like within the Microsoft stack.
Yeah. Or like a product owner. I can see that too,
Mhm.
right? Because you're really making the decisions and deciding where to go. But I think that's truly what CRM admins have always been, though. They've had to fight for, hey, like our tool can do this. We don't need a separate tool built on, so I think that in a lot of ways, it's not like it's changed just because the stack is so much bigger. I feel like I've always played that part, even before I was officially a CRM admin.
We just have more options and better options than we did like maybe 10 years ago.
Agreed.
Yeah. So not every company, a lot of companies that have Office 365, D365, Power Platform, they don't have a full-time role dedicated to it. So at what point do you feel like an organization should commit to it being a full-time role versus maybe someone's part-time, like fractional part of their job? Like, how do you determine that? Is it based on number of users? Is it based on complexity? Is it based on the size of the organization?
I was going to let Marilyn answer first. Get his thoughts.
I guess I would probably go more for complexity of business technology. You could be a company of 10 people, but if you're, running hundreds of transactions per day through a dynamic system, or you're managing like significant amounts of your business there, you might need a full-time person to manage, maintain, and extend it, right? Similarly, or I guess contrarily, you could also have like a 500 user company that's just using it as a glorified Rolodex and it barely ever changes. And so you don't need a full-time person, or at least maybe you do, but you haven't decided that it's worth the investment into the technology. That varies a lot by organization, and I think it varies a lot by then what that scope is, right? Is it just you're just the CRM admin and I only ever want you to do anything in Dynamics, or is it more broadly either Microsoft stack or business applications or whatever else? And I think that makes a big difference too.
I agree. I 100% agree on the complexity part. Because you could have a really small deployment, but have so much customization using Power Automate, workflows, I mean, whatever it is, and you have nobody to maintain it. And if you are paying, if you don't want to pay a vendor to upkeep it, at that point, that's when you need to decide to get a CRM admin and commit to it. Now, if you work with a vendor and you have very small customization and you like working with the vendor, I mean, I think it all has to do with where you'd rather invest the money, in a vendor, or if you'd rather invest it in somebody internally who's going to really get bought into your organization. Both can be successful. I just, really depends on where you want to invest that money.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
And I guess I will say that there are some vendors, and shameless plug here, I'm one of them, that do offer like essentially an admin for hire service, so like a fractional admin. And I feel like that's usually a little bit different than kind of your standard consulting, like I call you and you scope a project, and we do the project, and then I call you.
Or support.
Or I call you for support or whatever. Like, and in those models, like you are generally getting somebody who's going to be more familiar with your organization because you're going to keep working with the same person over time. And those can be pretty cost effective if you don't have that much like for a full-time admin to do, right? Like you could spend less than half of what you might spend on a salary for a good admin anyway on a service like that over the course of a year. But I agree, like if you're very active in an application, and you're constantly like enhancing it and adding to it and solving new business problems with it, you do probably have enough work there for a full-time person. If the organization is large enough, you might have enough work there for a whole team. And then you're like an owner and then supporting people.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of it, so even if you aren't doing that, because I think obviously if you're going to be not only doing the upgrades, which you have to do now, but using those new features, you need somebody who's invested into looking into it, testing it, like who understands technology, business process. But I always think of like an IT support situation. You know, if a user runs into a problem, who's going to answer that question for them? And then it ends up in IT support's hands. And do you have the knowledge on that team to help support it? So I think that also goes into it too, is that troubleshooting, answering questions, training. You might have somebody doing it part-time, but they might not be technical enough to be like, oh gosh, you're getting an error message. How do we troubleshoot that? But if your IT support team doesn't have the the knowledge either, or you don't want to invest the knowledge in it because you can just hire somebody.
It's true.
That actually leads me to another question I had is, do you think the admin should be on the business side or the IT team?
What do you think, Ashley?
I was so hoping this question wouldn't come to me. I fully believe that CRM admins, Power Platform admins, whatever we want to call them, should be in the business. That is my opinion. Now, I think they should have one foot in the business and one foot in IT, because you have to have a good relationship with both. But structurally and organizationally, they should sit within the business, whether that be in marketing, sales operations, wherever you fit them in. I personally think that they fit better there. One of the reasons I think that is because sales, or your end users, salespeople I traditionally work with the most, will start to see you as a part of their team. They will see you as them rather than IT coming in and telling them what to do and how to work. So that I've always had that belief that they did. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts though.
I agree
Yes.
with you. Yeah, go ahead, Merlin.
Well, I'm curious. So in your specific situation, you just mentioned like, oh, the salespeople see you then as sort of one of them. But how do you handle that if your deployment is not just sales, but is sales and maybe service and maybe field service? And so now you can't be in all three of those departments simultaneously. So then do you need to have 3 different CRM admins?
I don't think so. I think it depends, first of all, on the knowledge and skill of somebody, right? Not everybody can do sales and field service. That's a really unique combination. But I think it depends on where you put them organizationally and how I think anyone on the business side, you're going to see them more as a part of you than anyone in IT. I hate to say it, that line has been drawn. Business and IT can work together super well. Seen it happen. I've seen it also not work well. But I think anytime you have them, like if that person sits in sales operations or marketing, they're going to know that you're on their team or you're on their side because you're already part of the business. And I think that's where power users and like having, and really, I call them an ambassador program, working people up to be able to know so much to be able to help, and doing job shadowing and things like that. They can take on some of that, like, hey, I'm in your corner, I'm on your team, where you can be more of the like bigger picture.
Yeah, what I've seen, Merlin, I was thinking the same thing, is what if you have multiple apps deployed? What I normally see is that, yeah, if they sit on the business, like it's usually the primary use case. So like we have the most sales users, so they're on the sales team, or maybe it's mostly used for field service, and so they're part of the service team. It's either the kind of the largest group that they're a part of, or the one that went first. So like normally you don't deploy Dynamics with all of it all at once. So it's like whatever the first one was, like the early adopters, like they might get the admin on their team just because they were the first.
I'll also say a lot of it has to do with budget, and salespeople and sales teams tend to get the most budget. I hate to say it like that, but it is much easier to justify a position on the sales team than any other team in the business.
That is also true.
That's probably a good point. It's probably a good point. So I feel like this topic has made me think. I'm presently reading a book. It is about product teams, and the book is called Empowered. It's by Marty Kagan. If any listeners want to go check it out. But like his whole big thing is about empowered product teams. And as I think about like Dynamics or Power Platform within an organization, I feel like it's best if you think about it as a product for your organization and not as like a service. And one of the distinctions that he draws in the book is that often IT or in some cases product teams are sort of seen as working for the business, right? And I feel like I've heard this before, like IT is here to serve the business, IT serves the business, which automatically puts IT or anybody else who's serving the business in a subservient role, which means you don't make decisions. You don't get to tell us what to do. We tell you what to do, and then you just go and execute on it, right? It doesn't give you any ownership of whatever it is you're working on. And I think if a Dynamics deployment falls into that same serving the business model, it's going to turn into the VP of sales says he wants these 3 features implemented. And now the CRM admin just goes and builds those 3 features. There's no context, there's no why, there's no, well,
they're order takers.
They're just taking orders and they're just implementing software. And at the end of the day, everybody's going to be unhappy, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, so this sort of broaches a larger philosophical topic about IT's role inside an organization. But I guess I feel like a CRM admin should behave as the product owner of that Dynamics product. And as the product owner, they should be empowered to solve business problems, like get brought a problem, and they and or their team of experts can determine how best to solve that problem, to get the outcomes that the business needs, and work hand in hand with the business, in which case it doesn't actually matter if they sit in business or if they sit in IT. And I feel like, Liz, to your example of like the first group to go or the largest group, and that's where the admin sits, like, then I feel like the other departments turn into sort of second-class citizens. Like, well, the admin sits in sales, so guess who always gets their new features first? Sales.
Yeah.
And service is always like the redheaded stepchild. And that's not really a great outcome either.
So are we seeing Dynamics customers adopt the product owner concept?
I'm trying to push it, but
because I have not
much
seen
traction it's
it
getting.
real life for Dynamics, but I do know that's a very common job title on the Salesforce side of things.
I've seen it starting to appear in the Dynamics world. I know a couple of people whose like their title is product owner, and then they have more specific people under them because they're the whole vision, the whole strategy, the decision making, and then there's, you know, a Dynamic CRM admin for sales underneath them, or somebody over Power Automate. I have seen it starting to pop up, but it's not common.
Yeah. And I think it is normal, or it could be possible for a product owner to have a whole team supporting them. Like maybe they're focusing on a certain area, they have an area of specialty, or you have BAs and you have developers or whatever.
Right.
Merlin, you said something that really hit home and kind of hurt my heart a little bit there. You know, when you talk about like IT being order takers, or like they're just servicing the business, that kind of thing. That's one of the reasons why I've always thought that a CRM admin sitting on the business side is easier, because they see you, they understand that you can understand the way that they work. Too many times I've worked with IT organizations and they don't understand business process. They can't speak the language. And I think that that's a really common, conception, whether it's a misconception or not. And so I have found it easier to convince sales leaders, service leaders to let me help them fix their process or offer suggestions, and not just say, oh, sure, we'll put a Band-Aid on that with some technology, when I'm not in IT.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting point, because I sort of feel like if I were structuring an organization, I would put that role in IT, but I would make sure that the person in that role, like one of their primary job functions would be to essentially make friends with the sales leaders and the service leaders, right? To build those bridges and be like, I know what you're thinking, but I'm not actually like the network administrator who is super controlling over his or her like technology fiefdom. Like, I am here to help you, but I'm in IT so that I can also force all of these IT people to do the stuff that you need them to do, right? And try to convince them that you're like the secret agent on the inside of IT.
I think, yeah, like Merlin, that idea though, you're just having to deal with potentially a stigma or a bad connotation or whatever is going on with all the previous experiences with IT that maybe weren't like that. And that just getting past that, and it probably depends on the culture of the organization too. But I just think that's the potential issue with them sitting on the IT team, and that's Ashley's point.
And I can't tell you how many times I've had sales leaders when I say, hey, can I help fix that problem? They're just like, no, you have nothing to do with it. You can't. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've spent 10 years learning sales process and how you work and understanding it. I can help. And the great thing about me is that I'm not tied to just this team or that team. And I have the ear of, you know, this person who can help. So I think that sometimes when you're sitting in IT, they don't see you as a part of them, regardless of where you sit in the business.
Interesting.
Yeah,
it's too bad.
Those are all true stories. They hit the heart.
Okay, so next question is, let's say you're an organization and you decide it is time to put someone full-time into this role, product owner, admin, whatever we're calling it. Like, what would your advice be? Like, where do you find that person? What sort of skill set do you look for? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, admin, if you were going to hire your own, a duplicate of yourself, what are the skill sets to look for?
I think that you have to, I mean, no matter where they sit, like we've been talking about this for the last few minutes, you have to understand and be able to speak business process. And you also have to be able to take those requirements that the business is giving you and translate them to somebody in a tech role. So if they have no experience in Dynamics or they have nothing, they have to at least be able to take business requirements, understand them enough to translate them to a tech person, you know, to a developer to build it, and then take what they've built and walk the business through testing it, whatever, you know, proving that it's what they asked for. You know, so I think if nothing else, they have to at least understand both sides enough to go between.
Do you have a
That's a really good
strong
point.
preference on, like, is it someone that's already maybe part of the company or an external hire, or doesn't it matter if they have the right skill set?
I think it could work either way. I think that external hires sometimes work. They come in with different ideas, but that doesn't mean that like internal promotions or moving people into that role couldn't be successful, especially if they had exposure to the CRM system before or understand the process really well. But I think that admins or just somebody in this product owner kind of role, it's a really unique thing, you know, because you have to be able to adapt to your audience because you're not working with just one set of people.
Yeah, it's true. Well, and like I was ranting about for a little while, right? Like you have to try to make friends with all of the leaders of the business groups that are using the platform and also the IT people that might control permissions and access or hardware if you're doing something on-prem or, you know, whatever else. Like there's a lot of relationship building, I think, that has to go into the role.
You have to be a good salesman too. And I've actually been told I'm a good salesman because you have to sell people on your vision, on your ideas, or like, hey, you told me that this was your problem. This can fix it. And you have to sell them on that idea that it will.
You need to be persuasive.
You do.
Yeah.
But you also have to be personable. You know, if you're grouchy and don't want to listen to people or yell every time they call you, you're not going to be a good fit for that role either, because you have people calling you all the time with questions or issues, or you explain the same thing 17 times to the same person, and you just have to do it with a smile on your face and have patience. I mean, it sounds so simple, but
we've all encountered the admin that like some end user calls them for help and they're like, no, I've told you that before, and they like hang up on them and don't help them.
And it's like I said, like it's customer service, it's technical, it's business process. It's such a unique kind of role that not a lot of people can do it. Like, I hate to say it like that, but
or can do it, like excel at it.
Yeah, do it right.
I'm confused, Ashley. If you can't be grouchy, how have you managed to do it for so long?
Oh, Merlin, I knew that was coming. As soon as I said it and saw your face, I was like, oh, Merlin's gonna say something.
It's true. It's interesting though, because I feel like all the skill sets that you're both describing are literally the skill sets that are in this book for product owners. Like if you were running like a software company, like you're building the next, I don't know, WhatsApp, like all of the same things that those product owners need to have, like all the stuff he's laying out in this book, they're like, your product owner needs to be able to do this and needs to be able to do this. That's all those same skill sets. So I really feel like that's what the job role ought to be as a product owner, like somebody who can say the business, whatever part of business is having some sort of problem, like we can't track our pipeline or whatever, like the Dynamics product owner has to say, I can help you solve that problem. Here's some different ways that we can help solve that problem. Like we'll come up with a solution, we'll make the business better, we'll help you fix this problem. And then actually, like you were saying, like you have to be able to sell them on that as the solution. Be like, no, trust me, this is going to work. You just got to give it a chance and you'll see.
That I think this is a great point though, because like I've read a lot of admin job descriptions and I feel like, again, a lot of the time they focus on the technology. Like how many years experience do you have with Dynamics specifically, if it's a Dynamics admin role? But it's, yeah, like to your point, like critical thinking, problem solving, communication, like all of that is just as important, assuming that the person can figure out or learn the technical parts that they need to for the role.
It also has to be somebody that you're going to feel comfortable putting in front of the, minimum wage person taking calls at the service desk, doing customer service, all the way up to the president, because you're going to have the CEO. Yeah, you're going to have conversations with them, pitching your vision or sharing what needs to change. I mean, so it has to be somebody that can, and have those people be comfortable with them. You have to, it can't be standoffish or anything.
Yeah, they have to be able to like adapt and relate to almost any type of person.
I think empathy is another thing we have not touched on yet. I think that empathy is a huge part of the role, which is probably the biggest part that I struggle with, shockingly. You have to feel like you're in their shoes, like understanding their pain, in such a way that you want to do nothing else but help them. So empathy, I think, is a huge part of the role, where I think that's a big difference between working in the consulting world and working in the admin role.
Well, I think high quality consultants also should have empathy, but yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I don't actually think there's a lot of difference from a skill set, like a good consultant and a good product owner / admin, like they're really similar types of people that you're looking for.
But you can't be an admin without empathy, because I've had salespeople call me crying, it's a regular occurrence. It's something you have to do.
And you're permanently part of that business. You're not just going to move on to the next project in a month and kind of forget about them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, that's good points. I feel like the technology, like focusing on technology skills is foolish. Like most anybody, not anybody necessarily, but most anybody can learn the technology. Like if you're focusing on, I just want to find somebody who has this much experience on the product so that they can configure the features and functionality, like then again, you're not looking at a product owner at that point. You're just looking at a doer, an order taker. And then if you're hiring an order taker as your admin, then who's going to tell you if your idea is a good one?
Who's going to tell you no?
Right. Who's going to say, well, you could do it that way, but you could also do it this way and it might be better. And here's why. Mm-hmm. The order taker is going to be like, okay.
I think that feeds, Merlin, really well into the like why and how and when do you get an admin? Because a lot of, I hate to say it, but a lot of partners tend to just want to make everybody happy, right? So they'll just implement whatever you ask for, however it can be done. The point when you need an admin is when your system is so far to a point that it's just not manageable anymore. Or you're so reliant on a partner. That's a really good time to get an admin in to say, no, we shouldn't do it this way. Or let's think about this instead, so to have that person between like the sales VP, the CIO, and the partner who's just trying to make everyone happy. You need somebody in the middle who can like actually drive that into a good direction, and not be afraid to stand up to those kinds of people.
Yeah. There's a different dynamic there being a full-time employee, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's true. Well, and somebody at the end of the day has to ask why. Like, if the VP of customer service says, I need the system to do these 3 things, someone, whether that's the admin or the consultant or somebody, needs to say, okay, but why?
Yeah, and I think
And-
Ashley's point is like if there's an admin, there's kind of another safety net, like another person there to ask why if
Right.
your consulting team isn't.
Right.
Yeah.
The admin can say, okay, why? So that I can understand this in the broader picture of our full Dynamics implementation, so that I can turn around to the partner and say, here's what we need done.
Mhm.
Instead of like a lot of consultants will just say, okay, that's what you want. Here's an estimate. I will do it. I have done it. There you go. And then 6 months later, the service is like, okay, like they did what I asked for, but it turns out it didn't actually give me what I wanted.
It's not what I needed at all.
Not
And it's
actually
not
what I needed.
sustainable. I see that more than anything.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable over time because maybe
Right.
you configured it so uniquely to what you had at the time, you couldn't scale it as you grew.
Yep.
Ugh.
I will say, I think a high quality consulting team can, like, they don't have to have those issues, but yes, it's out there. I've seen it happen.
I agree.
Any final thoughts on the role of an admin / product owner and when you need one?
The only thing that I would say is don't wait too long. If you think you need one, that's probably when you should start.
Do you feel like there's any
Together.
like clear red flags or warning signs when you're hitting the we've waited too long point?
I think going back to just our last week conversation about user adoption. So if nobody's using the system, or if you've had a bad implementation, maybe your system is so complex that you can't do anything without a partner. There should be a lot of things that you should do in-house, right? And if you can't unravel what they've done, or you have no idea what's in your system, seen that before too. You've uncovered things every now and then. I think that any of those are red flags. Or if somebody internally is the part-time CRM admin, but really they're spending 38 hours a week on it, that's probably when it's time.
Those are good points.
It's a good indicator. That was actually going to be kind of my indicator is I think every deployment should have an owner. Somebody needs to own it. And if that person who is tasked with owning it is doing it part-time, and you discover over time they are either not doing it anymore because their regular job is taking over too much of their time, or their ownership of your deployment is taking up too much of their time, they're not getting the rest of their job done, like that's a pretty good indicator you need to split those roles.
Yeah.
And put somebody into that ownership role.
Excellent points to end on. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Dynamics Hot Dish podcast. For additional content and previous episodes, check out our website at dynamicshotdish.com, follow us on Twitter at dynamicshotdish, and subscribe to our podcast for notifications. Thanks. See you next time.